My friends, there are moments in history when a single story captures something larger than itself. A story that shines a light not just on one person's struggle, but on the struggles of millions. Tonight, I want to share one such story. Not long ago, a black woman, a daughter of ordinary beginnings, rose to create something extraordinary. With no inherited wealth, no powerful last name, no easy doors opening for her, she built a bank. But not just a bank. She built an institution rooted in fairness, opportunity, and inclusion. She wanted to create a place where families once denied credit could buy their first homes, where small business owners with nothing but a dream could finally access the resources to grow, where young people could learn not just to survive but to thrive. It was not easy. Every step forward was met with skepticism. Every boardroom she entered reminded her she did not fit the mold. But she pressed on, fueled not by privilege but by perseverance. She knew that if she succeeded, her victory would belong to more than herself. It would belong to the teachers, the workers, the parents, and the children who deserved a chance at something better. And then came the day of betrayal. She arrived at her own institution, the bank she had dreamed, designed, and built, and found herself locked out. Imagine that the very doors she had opened for others were closed against her. The bank she poured her heart into now declared she no longer belonged. This was not just about one CEO. It was about the struggle so many face when the systems they trust turn their backs on them. It was about the pain of building, sacrificing, believing, only to be told that none of it matters. But my friends, that is not where the story ends, because injustice never has the final word. Out of betrayal rises resolve. Out of exclusion comes determination, and out of brokenness comes the call to rebuild, not just for ourselves, but for the generations yet to come. Her fight is not hers alone. It belongs to every single person who has ever been denied a seat at the table they helped build. It belongs to every worker who has given their best only to be overlooked. It belongs to every dreamer who has been told, no, but chooses to keep going anyway. And in that struggle, there is a reminder for all of us that progress does not come from waiting for permission. Progress is claimed by people who refuse to give up. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The nurse works double shifts to save lives. The factory worker showed up at dawn to provide for his family. The student is studying by candlelight because she believes in her future. This story is about more than a bank. It is about the kind of country we want to be. Do we want to be a nation where the doors of opportunity are locked and guarded? Or do we want to be a nation where those doors swing open wide for all who dare to walk through? The choice is ours. And with that choice comes responsibility. We must take responsibility for building systems that are fairer. We must take responsibility for lifting others as we climb. We must take responsibility for never turning our backs on those who make the road easier for us to travel. So let us rise to that responsibility. Let us believe, truly believe, that perseverance matters, that change is possible, that tomorrow can be brighter than today, because this story, her story, reminds us that no lock is strong enough to hold back a determined spirit. Every journey worth remembering begins not with applause, not with recognition, not with easy access to power, but with a single spark of belief. Belief that life can be more than what it appears to be. Belief that one person, armed only with courage and conviction, can build something that the world insists is impossible. This is where her story began. She was not born into wealth. There was no inheritance to cushion her steps, no powerful connections to pull her forward. She was shaped by modest beginnings, raised in a world that often whispered its limitations into her ears. Stay where you are. Don't reach too far. This is not for you. Those words could have settled into her spirit. They could have convinced her to settle for less, but instead, they lit a fire. From an early age, she learned to see what others overlooked. Where some saw barriers, she imagined pathways, when others accepted no. As the final answer, she heard, "Not yet." She carried within her a quiet vision, one that grew louder with each challenge she faced. That vision was not of comfort or recognition, but of transformation. She dreamed of building something greater than herself, something that could outlast her, something that could serve those who had been told all their lives that they did not belong. The road was not smooth. It rarely is for those who dare to step off the beaten path. She entered spaces where her presence was questioned. She walked into boardrooms where she was met with silence, skepticism, or the weight of being the only one who looked like her. At every turn, she encountered doubt, not only about her ideas but about her very right to stand in those rooms at all. And yet, she returned again and again, carrying herself with the dignity of someone who refused to be defined by others' low expectations. She worked tirelessly. Long nights spent studying, preparing, writing plans, revising them, and starting again. She gave up sleep, gave up ease, gave up the safety of smaller dreams. She shouldered rejection after rejection, not because her vision was flawed, but because it was bold, and boldness is always met first with resistance. Every no became fuel. Every closed door became another reminder of why she needed to keep going. But her dream was not simply about proving she could succeed. It was not about building wealth for herself or securing her own place in the world. Her vision was deeper, more radical, and more generous. She wanted to create an institution that reimagined what a bank could be. A bank that was not just about transactions, but about trust. A bank that saw people not as risks to be managed, but as potential waiting to be realized. To her, this was about more than money. It was about dignity. It was about equity. It was about giving families the tools to buy homes, sending children to college, helping small business owners who had been overlooked finally get a chance to grow. She saw the faces of the people who had been excluded by traditional systems. She heard their stories, and she carried them with her, each one a reminder that what she was building was not simply a financial institution, but a bridge between exclusion and opportunity, between despair and possibility. She poured everything into this dream, her time, her resources, her very spirit. Each obstacle tested her resolve, but none broke it, because she knew something that cannot be taught in textbooks or measured in profits, that the worth of a dream is not in how easy it is to achieve, but in how deeply it serves others once it is realized. In the end, what she built was not just a structure of glass and steel, not just policies and accounts. What she built was proof that the impossible is possible, proof that ordinary beginnings can give rise to extraordinary outcomes, proof that one person's determination can create opportunities for thousands. A bank, in the eyes of most, is simply a place of numbers, columns of figures, accounts tracked, money exchanged and guarded. For many, it is cold and impersonal, designed to keep wealth safe, but rarely to build it for those who need it most. But for her, the bank she envisioned was never meant to be an impersonal machine. It was never meant to be a fortress protecting only the privileged. It was meant to be a symbol. Symbols matter. They are more than the objects we see. They are what we believe about ourselves, about our communities, about our futures. And she understood that if she could build a bank, it could stand for far more than loans and ledgers. It could stand as proof that fairness was not just an idea, but a practice. It could show that access was not a gift bestowed on the lucky few, but a right extended to everyone willing to work and believe. Her bank was born out of this conviction that the financial system should not be a closed circle, reserved only for those who already have. It should be a platform where ordinary families could step into possibility. It should be the place where a teacher's savings could turn into a home, where an immigrant's small idea could become a thriving business, where a young student's first account could be the beginning of a lifetime of independence and stability. She imagined it not as a building filled with paperwork and silence, but as a community hub of possibility. Within its walls, she pictured financial literacy workshops where young people could learn what their parents had never been taught. She pictured small business owners walking in with little more than a dream and walking out with the capital to bring that dream alive. She pictured families finally hearing yes instead of no when they applied for the mortgage that would give them stability and pride. Every choice she made was guided by this larger purpose. Every policy she approved, every strategy she implemented was infused with the belief that this bank was not just hers. It belonged to the people it served. It belonged to the communities that had too often been left behind. It belonged to the future generations who needed to see, with their own eyes, that a bank could be more than a barrier. It could be a bridge. And because she understood symbols, She knew her presence at the head of that institution mattered just as much as the services it offered. A black woman leading a bank was not simply an achievement, it was a declaration. It was a visible, undeniable reminder that progress was possible, that leadership did not belong to one gender, one race, or one background alone. For every young person who walked through the doors, seeing her in that role, whispered something powerful. You too can build. You too can lead. In time, the bank grew beyond its balance sheets. It became a story that people carried with them. Customers spoke not just of their accounts, but of their pride. Employees spoke not just of their jobs, but of their mission. Communities pointed to the institution as evidence that change was not just a theory, but a reality they could touch. It became a symbol that lived not only in its marble walls and polished counters, but in the lives it touched and the dignity it restored. This is what made her bank different. This is what gave it meaning beyond money. To her, every loan approved was not just a financial decision. It was an act of belief in someone's potential. Every savings account opened was not just a number entered into a system. It was an investment in a child's future. Every policy rewritten to expand access was not simply paperwork. It was justice made tangible. Her bank was a symbol that institutions could change, that fairness could be built into their foundations, and that equity was not only possible, but powerful. There are moments in life when the ground shifts beneath your feet, when the work of years is tested in an instant. For her, that moment came not in the form of failure, not in the form of market collapse, but in something far more personal and far more painful: betrayal. On that morning, she walked toward the building she had dreamed into existence. The glass walls reflected not only the city skyline, but the sacrifices she had made. Every late night, every rejection turned into fuel, every dollar saved and invested into this vision. All of it stood there in brick and stone as living proof of her perseverance. She had entered those doors countless times before. She had held meetings in its conference rooms, shaken hands with families receiving their first loans, and mentored young employees eager to learn the business. This was her creation, her institution, her legacy. But that day, the doors did not open. Security she had once hired no longer recognized her authority. The keys she carried no longer fit. Her access card, once a symbol of leadership, was suddenly useless. She was no longer welcome in the very place that bore her fingerprints in every policy, every plan, every foundation. She was, quite literally, locked out of her own bank. The weight of that moment was not just logistical. It was spiritual. To be cast aside by strangers is one thing. To be excluded by those who once stood beside you is another. The betrayal came not from nameless outsiders, but from within. From board members who once cheered her vision, from colleagues who once spoke of loyalty, from allies who had benefited from her leadership. Somewhere along the way, ambition twisted into greed, fear hardened into opposition, and loyalty dissolved into silence. And now, with one calculated act, they sought to erase her. Betrayal has a way of cutting deeper than opposition ever could. Opposition is expected. Betrayal, however, is a knife in the back, sharp, sudden, delivered by hands you once trusted. She stood outside those locked doors, not only as a leader denied access to her own institution, but as a woman who had been told, in no uncertain terms, that she no longer belonged to the vision she had created. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. For centuries, doors had been locked against women, against Black Americans, against those who dared to reach beyond the boundaries assigned to them. She had built a bank so that those doors might finally open, that others would not feel the sting of exclusion she had known. And yet here she was, standing on the outside once again, as if history itself were mocking her. The betrayal reverberated far beyond her own life. Employees who admired her now questioned their place. Customers who had placed trust in the bank felt the tremors of uncertainty. Communities that saw in her a symbol of progress suddenly feared that progress could be undone with the turn of a key. One leader is betrayed, the ripple is felt by all who believed in the promise of her leadership. Yet within betrayal, there is also clarity. Masks fall away, true motives are revealed. In that locked door, as she could see plainly what had been hidden in the fragility of institutions when greed outweighs principle, the vulnerability of progress when it is not protected by vigilance, the cost of daring to build something that threatens the old order. The day of betrayal stripped away illusion, leaving only truth. Standing there, denied entry, she faced the kind of test that no textbook can prepare you for. This was not a question of policy or profit, it was a question of spirit. Would she surrender to the voices that told her she was finished? Would she accept the erasure of her contributions? Or would she hold fast to the knowledge that while they might control the locks on the door, they could not control the fire within her? Betrayal has always been a crucible. It is the moment when dreams are either destroyed or refined into something stronger. And on that day, as she faced the closed doors of her own creation, weight of the betrayal pressed heavily upon her, demanding a choice about what kind of leader, what kind of woman, what kind of builder she would continue to be. Injustice is more than an action. It is an experience that cuts through the skin and settles deep in the soul. It is the wound that lingers long after the moment has passed, the ache that resurfaces when the world tells you, again and again, that you do not belong. For her, being locked out of her own bank was not only about being denied access to a building. It was about the heavy weight of centuries pressing down on her shoulders. The pain of injustice is unique because it does not strike the body alone. It strikes the spirit. She had walked into that institution countless times with her head held high, certain that her sacrifices and her perseverance had built something no one could take away. And yet, in an instant, it was taken. That act told her, and told the world, that her blood, sweat, sacrifice could be dismissed with the turning of a key. It is the same pain felt by the worker who trains for years only to be overlooked for promotion because of a last name or a skin color. The same pain carried by the student who studies harder than anyone else yet is told that opportunity is reserved for someone who looks different, who comes from a family of means. The same pain borne by communities that invest their faith in systems that promise fairness but deliver exclusion. Injustice is painful because it breaks the unwritten contract of trust. She trusted that hard work would be rewarded, that sacrifice would be honored, that leadership would be respected. Instead, she found that the very institution she built could betray her, and in that betrayal, the myth of fairness was shattered once more. But the pain is not hers alone. It belongs to every community that has known closed doors and silenced voices. It belongs to every person who has been told that their worth is conditional, that their dreams must wait, that their presence is tolerated but never fully embraced. When injustice falls on one, it reverberates through all. It is not confined to a single person or a single act. It spreads outward like ripples on water, touching countless others who see themselves reflected in that story. And yet, the devastating part of injustice is not only that it denies what has been earned, it is that it dares to question identity itself. To be locked out of her own bank was to be told that her identity as founder, as leader, as visionary, could be erased. It was to be told that history could be rewritten without her name. The pain of injustice lies not only in exclusion but in attempted erasure. Still, even as the pain cuts deep, it teaches. It exposes the flaws in the systems we take for granted. It unmasks the fragility of progress when it is not protected by vigilance. It reminds us that injustice is not an abstract concept to be debated but a lived reality that demands response. The pain, as heavy as it is, becomes a teacher, showing us where the cracks are, showing us what must be repaired, showing us how far we still have to go. For her, that pain was a mirror of history. It echoed the stories of generations before her who were locked out of opportunities they had earned, who were told, "You do not belong," even as they stood on ground they had cultivated with their own hands. It was the continuation of a struggle older than her bank, older than her career, older even than her lifetime. It was the reminder that injustice does not simply disappear with one success, one victory, one breakthrough. It must be confronted, again and again, wherever it shows its face. And there is no pain like the pain of seeing your community wounded by your own suffering. For she knew that her exclusion was not hers alone. It would be felt by those who looked up to her, by those who believed in the institution, by those who carried their own fragile hopes into the bank she had built. To carry the weight of one's own pain is difficult enough. To carry the weight of others' disappointment, others' heartbreak, fear, that is the true cost of injustice. The pain of injustice is heavy because it is layered. It is personal and collective, immediate and historic, practical and symbolic. It is the sharpness of betrayal and the dull ache of centuries. It is the reminder that progress is fragile, that fairness must be guarded, and that even the strongest can be wounded by the hands of those who claim to stand beside them. When we think of heroes, our minds often turn to grand figures etched into history, generals who win wars, presidents who deliver stirring speeches, visionaries who build nations. The true fabric of progress is rarely woven by the hands of the celebrated few. More often, it is stitched quietly, persistently by ordinary people who refuse to give up when faced with extraordinary challenges. In neighborhoods across America, heroism does not wear a cape, nor does it command a spotlight. It lives in the teacher who stays late after class to help a struggling student master the lesson, even when the paycheck does not match the effort. It lives in the parent who works 2 jobs, not because they seek glory, but because they refuse to let their children go without. It lives in the small business owner who puts everything on the line to create opportunity, not just for themselves, but for their community. These acts may not make headlines, but they make history in the lives they touch. And in truth, they are the foundation upon which all great institutions are built. For her, the CEO, locked out of her own bank, was not her own strength alone that allowed her to rise. It was the invisible strength of countless ordinary heroes who had shaped her path. She carried with her the resilience of a grandmother who worked long hours and still found time to tell stories that nourished hope. She carried the lessons of mentors who had no obligation to guide her, but who saw potential and chose to invest their time. She carried the discipline of parents who insisted that education was not an option, but a necessity. Their extraordinary acts were not documented in history books, but without them, her story would never have been possible. And this truth extends beyond her. Look around any community, and you will find stories of quiet courage. The custodian who saves every spare dollar to put a child through college. The nurse who works through exhaustion to comfort a patient in their darkest hour. The volunteer who gives up weekends to feed the hungry with no recognition except the gratitude in someone's eyes. These are not acts of convenience. They are sacrifices made out of love, conviction, and the unshakable belief that life can be better, not only for oneself, but for others. What makes these acts extraordinary is not their scale, but their impact. A word of encouragement can redirect the course of a life. A single opportunity extended to someone who has been overlooked can ripple through generations. The small sacrifices, the unseen commitments, acts of perseverance, these are what shift the arc of possibility. Ordinary heroes remind us that greatness is not confined to titles or positions. They prove that power is not always held in boardrooms or legislatures. It can be found in kitchens, classrooms, and crowded buses where people make choices every day to keep going, to keep building, to keep believing. They show us that you do not need wealth or influence to be a force for change. You need only the courage to act, the persistence to endure, and the faith that what you do matters. In moments of injustice and betrayal, it is often the memory of these ordinary heroes that sustains us. Their sacrifices whisper to us, if they could endure, so can you. Their courage says if they could rise, so must you. Their quiet strength forms an invisible army, carrying us when our own strength falters. While their names may not be engraved on plaques or displayed in galleries, their legacies live in every child who dares to dream bigger, in every community that refuses to surrender, in every barrier that is broken because someone, somewhere, refused to give up. The extraordinary acts of ordinary people remind us of a fundamental truth. History is not only written by the powerful, it is written in kitchens, classrooms, hospitals, and small businesses. It is written by people who, in their daily choices, push the world a little closer toward fairness, a little closer toward dignity, a little closer toward justice. Perseverance is the quiet force that shapes destiny. It is not loud, it does not demand attention, and yet it is the single thread running through every story of triumph. The call to persevere is the call to rise when the world insists you stay down, to keep moving when the road is long and the finish line is invisible. For her, the call to perseverance came not in moments of applause, but in moments of silence, The long nights when doubt was her only companion, the early mornings when she rose before the world awakened, the countless hours spent building something that only she could see. Perseverance was not a choice she made once, it was a decision she renewed every single day. Perseverance demands sacrifice. It asks us to keep walking when our feet achy, to keep building when our hands grow weary, to keep believing when evidence points the other way. She faced rejection after rejection, doors slammed shut, and voices that told her it could not be done. But perseverance is never measured in the number of setbacks. It is measured in the refusal to let setbacks have the final word. History is filled with examples of perseverance shaping the impossible into the inevitable. It was perseverance that carried civil rights marchers across the Edmund Pettus Bridge despite batons and tear gas. It was perseverance that fueled scientists who faced failure after failure before unlocking cures that would save millions. It was perseverance that allowed immigrants to build new lives with little more than faith and determination. None of these victories were easy. None of them were quick. All of them required the unshakable resolve to keep moving forward, even when the horizon remained out of reach. Perseverance is not glamorous. It rarely comes with praise. It often feels lonely. Yet it is in those lonely hours, when the world has turned away, that perseverance reveals its true power. For it is then that the decision to keep going becomes not just an act of survival, but an act of defiance. A declaration that failure will not define us, that obstacles will not defeat us, that injustice will not silence us. For her, perseverance was not about holding on to a title or protecting an institution. It was about honoring the journey that had brought her that far. It was about refusing to let betrayal erase years of sacrifice. It was about looking beyond the pain of the moment and seeing the possibility of tomorrow. Every time she chose perseverance, she was choosing to believe in the dignity of her labor, the worth of her vision, and the power of resilience. And this call to perseverance extends to us all. Life will test us in ways we cannot predict. We will face setbacks that sting, losses that wound, betrayals that shake our foundations. In those moments, the temptation to surrender will be strong. But perseverance whispers that surrender is not the only option. It tells us that endurance is itself a victory, that the act of continuing is an act of courage. Perseverance also demands humility. It does not promise quick rewards. It does not guarantee applause. It reminds us that progress is often measured not in leaps but in inches, not in single dramatic moments but in years of steady, determined work. It requires us to accept that greatness is rarely visible while we are in the midst of building it. And yet, there is a kind of quiet glory in perseverance. The glory of the runner who crosses the finish line, not because they were the fastest, but because they refused to stop running. The glory of the parent who raises a child through hardship, giving them opportunities they never had. The glory of communities who endure storms, rebuild from rubble, and stand taller than before. This is the glory that perseverance creates. Not always celebrated, but always transformative. The call to perseverance is universal. It belongs to the student struggling with books, to the worker holding down 2 jobs, to the dreamer who risks failure in pursuit of something greater. It belongs to all of us because none of us are exempt from hardship. The question is never whether challenges will come. The question is whether we will persevere through them. Responsibility is the weight we carry not because it is easy, but because it is necessary. It is the recognition that our actions do not end with us, that what we choose to do, or choose not to do, shapes the lives of others in ways both seen and unseen. It is the acknowledgement that leadership is never only about authority, it is about accountability, about the willingness to bear the burden of consequence. For her, the journey toward building a bank was paved with responsibility at every step. She understood that to dream of an institution was not enough. She had to be accountable for turning that dream into something real. She knew that the trust of employees, customers, and communities was not a gift, but a responsibility that demanded constant vigilance and care. Each policy drafted, each loan approved, each door opened to someone who had been excluded before. All of it carried the weight of responsibility. Responsibility is not glamorous. It often requires sacrifice, humility, and a willingness to place the needs of others above one's own comfort. It means staying longer than anyone else, asking harder questions, and refusing to take shortcuts even when no one is watching. It means recognizing that mistakes will come and that accountability is not about perfection, but about honesty, correction, and growth. In her story, responsibility also meant challenging systems that had been built to exclude. She could have chosen the easier path to work quietly within the structures that existed, to accept what was offered, to succeed individually while leaving the larger barriers untouched. But responsibility demanded more. It required her to see beyond herself, to recognize that her success was meaningless if it did not open doors for others. Responsibility is not carried only by leaders of institutions. It belongs to us all. The teacher has a responsibility not only to impart knowledge but to nurture potential. The doctor has a responsibility not only to treat illness but to preserve dignity. The parent has a responsibility not only to provide for a child's body but to nourish a child's spirit. Every role carries with it a burden and an opportunity to shape lives in ways that echo far beyond the moment. When responsibility is ignored, the consequences are profound. We see it in systems where profit is placed above people, where short-term gain undermines long-term stability, where those in power choose silence over justice. The erosion of responsibility leads not only to individual failure but to collective harm. Communities fracture, trust dissolves, and progress stalls when responsibility is abandoned. But when responsibility is embraced, the opposite occurs. Trust is built. Progress accelerates. Dignity is restored. A sense of belonging spreads. Responsibility is the invisible glue that holds communities together, the unseen force that allows institutions to endure, the quiet discipline that transforms ordinary efforts into extraordinary achievements. For her, responsibility was also personal. It meant carrying the hopes of those who looked up to her, the expectations of those who believed in her, the unspoken prayers of those who longed to see someone like them succeed. Responsibility pressed heavily on her shoulders, but it also gave her strength. It reminded her that she was not walking alone, that every step she took mattered not only for her own future, but for the futures of many. The lesson of responsibility is that freedom and progress are never without cost. To lead is to be accountable, to dream is to be disciplined, to build is to be answerable for what you create. Responsibility asks us not only to achieve but to uplift, not only to succeed but to ensure that others can follow. And while the burden may at times feel overwhelming, it is within that burden that meaning is found. Responsibility is not a weight meant to crush us, but a weight meant to anchor us, to remind us of our place in the larger human story, to ground us in humility, to call us to act not only for ourselves, but for one another. Courage is the inheritance passed down through generations, not in the form of wealth or possessions, but in the form of example. It is the quiet whisper of ancestors reminding us that fear does not have the final word. It is the visible proof that when ordinary people stand in the face of extraordinary odds, they create ripples that travel far beyond their own lives. For her, the journey to lead, to build, to dream on such a scale was not born in isolation. It was born from a lineage of courage that stretched back through time, through the stories of those who had faced barriers far greater and still chosen to push forward. Her own courage was part of a legacy, one written by those who had dared to believe that tomorrow could be better, even when today seemed unbearable. Think of the courage of the enslaved who whispered songs of freedom while toiling in fields, planting seeds of hope that would blossom generations later. Think of the courage of the marchers who walked unarmed into the face of dogs, hoses, and batons, refusing to retreat from their rightful place in society. Think of the courage of mothers and fathers who shielded their children from despair, insisting that education and dignity were worth the struggle. These were not abstract examples to her. They were the living roots from which her own determination grew. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act in spite of it. She knew fear intimately, the fear of failure, the fear of betrayal, the fear of being told she did not belong. But the legacy she carried reminded her that fear could never be allowed to dictate destiny. To step forward, to risk, to build. These were acts of courage rooted in history, sustained by the memory of those who had faced worse and still endured. The legacy of courage is found not only in grand gestures but in daily defiance. The factory worker who joins a union knowing it could cost his job. The immigrant who speaks in a language not her own, determined to be understood. The child who raises their hand in a classroom where no one looks like them, refusing to shrink into silence. Each of these moments may seem small, but together they form the living record of what courage truly looks like. Her own courage was reflected in choices that others might never see: the decision to try again after failure, the decision to trust when trust had been broken, the decision to believe in her own worth when the world seemed determined to deny it. That courage was not hers alone. It was drawn from the well of all who had come before, all who had chosen to keep going when retreat would have been easier. A legacy of courage is never static. It grows as each generation adds its own chapter. She inherited courage, but she also knew she was responsible for extending it, for making sure that those who came after her would have an example to draw from, just as she had drawn from the examples of others. This is the essence of legacy: to receive courage and to pass it on stronger and brighter than it was before. Courage is contagious. When one person dares to rise, others are inspired to stand taller. When one person refuses to be silent, others find their voice. When one person breaks through a barrier, the barrier weakens for everyone else. That is why a legacy of courage matters, because it multiplies, it spreads, it empowers far beyond the individual who first carried it. And so, the story of her courage cannot be separated from the larger story of courage itself. It is part of a continuum that stretches backward through history and forward into the future. It is part of a chain forged not by ease, but by struggle, not by comfort, but by sacrifice. Every link in that chain strengthens the next, binding together their generations in a shared commitment to move through fear, through resistance, through injustice, with unyielding determination. There are times in history when an individual's struggle becomes something larger than themselves. What begins as a personal trial transforms into a collective awakening, a spark that ignites the consciousness of a community. Her exclusion from the institution she built was not only a personal injustice, it was a signal flare that awakened something powerful in those who watched, those who cared, those who understood what was truly at stake. Communities are often stirred awake not by comfort but by crisis. When doors are slammed shut, when dignity is denied, when betrayal unfolds in plain sight, people begin to ask questions they had long avoided. They begin to recognize that what happens to one can happen to many. Silence in the face of injustices is never neutral. It is complicity. The awakening of community begins with this recognition that individual pain carries collective meaning. For generations, communities have been awakened in this way. The cries of children denied education awakened movements for schools. The sight of families evicted without cause awakened tenants' unions. The reality of systemic exclusion awakened civil rights marches that filled streets with voices demanding to be heard. In each case, it was the suffering of one or a few that revealed the truth to many, and in that revelation, unity was born. In her case, the awakening came as people realized that if a woman could be locked out of her own bank, then fairness was not guaranteed for anyone. Customers who had once simply opened accounts began to see themselves as stakeholders in a larger fight for dignity. Employees who had once viewed their jobs as routine began to see themselves as guardians of a mission greater than a paycheck. Neighbors who had once passed by the institution without thought began to see it as a symbol of their collective voice, their shared possibility, their mutual destiny. Awakening of a community is not just about outrage. It is about transformation. It turns passivity into participation, spectators into actors, isolation into solidarity. People begin to understand that they are not powerless observers but essential participants in shaping the future. They begin to recognize that the strength of a community is not measured by wealth or prestige, but by its willingness to stand together when one of its own is harmed. This awakening often manifests in small but powerful ways. Neighbors gathering in living rooms to discuss what they can do. Clergy lifting the issue in prayer, reminding their congregations of moral responsibility. Youth marching with signs that declare their refusal to inherit systems of exclusion. Letters written, petitions signed, calls made, conversations sparked in workplaces and schools. These acts may seem modest, but they represent the heartbeat of a community rediscovering its power. And in awakening, communities also rediscover their identity. They remember the values that bind them: fairness, justice, dignity, opportunity. They reclaim the narratives that had been overshadowed by complacency or fear. They look into the mirror of someone else's struggle and see their own reflection staring back. That recognition forges bonds stronger than any barrier, bonds that no institution or betrayal can easily sever. History reminds us that no great transformation has ever occurred without the awakening of community. Abolition, suffrage, labor rights, civil rights, all were achieved not by individuals acting alone, but by individuals awakening communities, and communities transforming nations. What begins as a single spark becomes a fire only when it spreads from one heart to another, one household to another, until entire streets, towns, and cities are lit with the determination to change. The awakening of community is also an act of memory, recalls the struggles endured by previous generations and honors them by refusing to remain passive. It remembers the cost of silence and the price paid when communities turn away from one another. It is both a continuation and a renewal, the moment when people say, "We have been here before, and we will not let history repeat itself without resistance." And perhaps most importantly, awakening transforms despair into hope. It tells people that no one stands alone. Even in the face of betrayal, there is power in unity. It shifts the focus from what has been lost to what can still be built. It takes the sting of injustice and turns it into the fuel for progress. Locks are meant to keep people out. They are symbols of control, of ownership, of exclusion. A door once open can be barred, a key once trusted can be revoked, and access once granted can be denied. For her, standing outside the doors of the bank she had built, the lock was more than a piece of metal. It was a declaration that others believed they had the power to silence her, to erase her, to shut her out from her own creation. Yet what those who turned the key did not understand is that a lock can only close off a place, not a spirit. Locks are temporary. They are mechanical. They are tied to structures and systems that can be changed. Hope, however, is not bound by steel or by barriers. Hope lives in the unseen places, in the heart, in the mind, in the resilience that no lock can contain. Hope is permanent because it cannot be confiscated. You cannot padlock belief. You cannot chain vision. You cannot bolt shut the determination of a soul that has already decided that tomorrow will be better. She understood this deeply. The lock was real. The betrayal was sharp. The exclusion stung, but none of it could extinguish the permanent flame that burned within her, the flame of hope that had guided her from the beginning. Hope is not naive optimism. It does not deny the reality of pain or the weight of injustice. Hope is defiance in the face of despair. It is the decision to look directly at the lock and still believe that another door will open. It is the choice to keep dreaming even when the world insists the dream has ended. Hope does not erase hardship, transforms how we endure it. History has shown us again and again that while locks can hold people back for a season, they cannot halt progress forever. The doors of schools were once locked to children of color, but hope marched them inside. Doors of polling stations were once locked to women, but hope carried their voices into the ballot box. The doors of opportunity have been locked countless times, yet each time hope has proven more enduring than the barrier before it. For her, that permanence of hope was a reminder of why she began in the first place. She had built not only a bank but a belief. That fairness was possible, that equity was achievable, that communities could rise when given the tools and trust to do so. Even when the lock barred her from entering the building, it could not bar her from carrying forward the purpose. The institution was physical. The mission was eternal. Locks can separate bodies from places, but they cannot separate people from ideas. And once an idea takes root in a community, once hope begins to spread from one person to another, no barrier can hold it back. The lock that shuts out one woman cannot silence the dreams of those who saw in her leadership a mirror of their own possibility. The lock that tries to erase her presence cannot erase the progress already set in motion. The permanence of hope is found in its ability to outlast seasons of hardship. It is like a seed lying dormant beneath the soil. Winter may be long, storms may rage, but in time, the seed will break through. The force of life is greater than the weight of earth above it. So it is with hope. It may be pressed down, it may be covered, it may seem hidden, but it never dies. And hope is not passive, It calls people to act, to build, to persist. It urges them to pick up the tools of change and to refuse to surrender their future to those who lock doors. Hope becomes the fuel for courage, the strength for perseverance, the vision that carries a people beyond what is to what can be. The lock was temporary. The hope was permanent, and in that permanence lies the unshakable truth that no barrier, no betrayal, no exclusion can hold back the power of belief once it takes root in the human spirit. Unity is one of the most powerful forces in human history. It has toppled empires, ended wars, built nations, and turned the impossible into reality. When people choose to stand together, shoulder to shoulder, no barrier is too high, no injustice too entrenched, no betrayal too crushing to withstand their collective strength. The power of unity is not measured by the wealth of the few, but by the determination of the many. It is not about everyone being the same, but about everyone believing in something greater than themselves. Unity does not erase differences, it harmonizes them, turning individual struggles into collective strength. Where one voice may be ignored, a chorus cannot be silenced. Where one person may falter, a community can carry them forward. We have seen the power of unity throughout history. It was unity that gave strength to those who marched across bridges demanding civil rights. It was unity that fueled workers who stood together in factories, mines, and fields to demand fair wages and safe conditions. It was unity that carried movements for freedom across continents, from villages to capitals, until regimes that once seemed immovable collapsed under the weight of collective will. Unity is not abstract. It is lived in daily acts of solidarity. It is neighbors watching out for one another. It is strangers offering support in times of crisis. It is communities gathering not just in times of celebration, but in times of loss, reminding one another that no one carries their burden alone. These acts, small in appearance, build into something immense. A shared recognition that we are stronger together than we could ever be apart. For her, the power of unity was revealed not only in the institution she built, but in the community that rallied when she was cast out. She discovered that her struggle resonated with others because they recognized it as their own. Her exclusion was not simply her loss. It was seen as a wound inflicted on the dignity of everyone who had ever felt shut out, denied, or silenced. In that recognition, unity was born. Unity does not require perfection. People will disagree, cultures will differ, perspectives will clash. But true unity is forged not by sameness but by shared commitment. It asks not that we erase our differences, but that we link them together like strands woven into a rope strong enough to pull down walls. In unity, the farmer's voice strengthens the teacher's, the worker's struggle deepens the leader's resolve, the youth's idealism fuels the elder's wisdom. The beauty of unity is that it multiplies strength without diminishing individuality. Each person retains their identity, their story, their perspective. Yet when bound together in common purpose, they form something far greater than the sum of their parts. This is why unity so often terrifies those who cling to power through division. A divided people can be controlled, but a united people cannot. The power of unity is also moral. It affirms that we are connected, that our lives are intertwined, that injustice for one is injustice for all. It reminds us that empathy is not weakness, but strength, because it ties us to the struggles and triumphs of those around us. Unity transforms suffering into shared responsibility and progress into shared celebration. And unity is resilient. Alone, people may fall under the weight of exhaustion or despair. Together, they find renewal in each other's strength. Where one grows weary, another steps forward. Where one loses hope, another lends theirs. This constant exchange of courage and support creates a momentum that no obstacle can stop. The power of unity has always been the answer to exclusion. When doors are locked, unity finds another way in. When systems fail, unity builds new ones. When individuals are silenced, unity amplifies their voices until they echo across nations. It is in unity that people discover the full measure of their strength. Not in isolation, not in division, but in standing as one. There are moments in every generation when people are called not simply to observe history, but to shape it. These moments arrive quietly at first, hidden in the struggles of individuals, the whispered stories of families, the overlooked battles fought in boardrooms, classrooms, and neighborhoods. But eventually, they demand attention, demanding that ordinary citizens rise to do extraordinary things. This call is not reserved for leaders with titles or offices. It belongs to everyone who believes in justice, fairness, and the possibility of a brighter tomorrow. The uplifting charge is the invitation to rise. It is the reminder that change does not come from waiting but from moving, from standing, from choosing to believe that our voices, our hands, and our actions matter. Too often, people underestimate their own power, imagining that history is written only by the powerful. Yet time and again, history proves otherwise. The Montgomery bus boycott was not led by the wealthy, but by maids, carpenters, and cooks who walked together for more than a year. The walls of apartheid did not fall because of a single decree, but because millions of ordinary people chose to resist, to hope, and to endure. The uplifting charge is not only about action, it is also about responsibility. It calls each person to recognize that passivity feeds injustice and silence strengthens oppression. To accept the uplifting charge is to accept that what happens to one impacts us all, and that indifference is itself a choice that allows barriers to remain unchallenged. True responsibility is not about carrying the weight alone, it is about joining hands, lifting together, and creating a force greater than any individual could ever summon. This charge is also rooted in imagination. To uplift, one must first envision what has not yet been built: a world without locked doors of exclusion, a society where dignity is not rationed, a community where opportunity is not hoarded. These are not fantasies. They are possibilities waiting to be realized by those courageous enough to imagine them. Imagination fuels resilience because it allows people to see beyond immediate pain and glimpse the future they are working toward. The uplifting charge is not an easy one. It requires perseverance when the road is long and resistance when setbacks come. It demands faith not only in oneself but in one another. It asks people to believe that their efforts, even when unseen, part of a larger movement building quietly in the hearts and actions of many. The most powerful transformations are rarely sudden. They are the result of countless small choices made by countless individuals who refuse to abandon the hope of change. What makes this charge uplifting is not only its demand for action, but also the spirit with which it calls people forward. It does not shame or scold, it inspires. It reminds us that we are capable of more than we know, that strength is not found in isolation but in unity, and that the act of rising together is itself a victory, even in moments of great loss or betrayal. The charge calls us to lift our eyes, to square our shoulders, to remember that dignity cannot be taken when it is held with conviction. The uplifting charge is also deeply personal. It looks different for each person. For one, it may mean speaking truth in a room where silence is expected. For another, it may mean teaching children to believe in their worth. For some, it may mean organizing, building, marching, or creating. For others, it may mean listening, supporting, or giving. No act is too small, for each act adds to the momentum of change. And so, the uplifting charge is not only a call to action, but a call to belief. Belief in oneself, belief in one's community, belief in the possibility of transformation. It is a call to move beyond fear, beyond cynicism, beyond resignation, and to step boldly into the work of creating a future worthy of those who came before and those who will come after. And so, from the locked doors of injustice to the open horizons of possibility, this story reminds us of who we are and what we are capable of. A Black CEO, locked out of her own bank, stands not as a symbol of defeat, but as a testament to resilience, courage, and vision. Her struggle is not hers alone. It belongs to every worker who has been overlooked, every dreamer who has been doubted, every community that has been told to wait its turn. We have seen in her story the very essence of the human journey, the trials of betrayal, the strength of perseverance, the awakening of community, the unshakable permanence of hope, and the unstoppable power of unity. These are not just themes in her life. They are instructions for our own. They tell us that progress is never handed down from above but built, piece by ordinary people choosing to act with extraordinary courage. The locks of exclusion are real. They exist in boardrooms, in classrooms, in systems that resist change, but they are never permanent. For every lock, there is a key. For every closed door, there is a path forward. And for every attempt to silence, there is a voice that rises stronger, louder, more determined than before. The conclusion of her story is not a period, but a call to each of us to rise, to believe, to act. It is a call to reject division and embrace unity, to remember that dignity cannot be denied when it is carried with conviction, to recognize that the future is not something we inherit, but something we build together. Let us be clear. The story of one woman locked out of her own bank is not about exclusion, but about the greater inclusion that comes when people refuse to be silent. It is not about despair, but about the hope that grows stronger in the face of injustice. It is not about endings, but about beginnings. Beginnings we are called to shape with our own hands, our own voices, our own courage. The future will not be defined by the locks that others place upon us. It will be defined by the hope we carry, the unity we forge, and the responsibility we accept. And in that future, the doors we open will not be for one, but for all.